I've always had this issue in painting where, after working on a piece for some time and things seemed to be going smoothly, I would reach a certain point in the process where everything would begin to fall apart. And what I mean by that is, at some point I feel like I hit a wall and the painting seems to look worse and worse the more I attempt to salvage it. Like it starts off going fine, and then all of a sudden it looks like trash. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that experiences this. More recently, something I've noticed, however, is that sometimes I may miraculously fix whatever issue was causing my painting to look so horrendous, and I go on to complete it like nothing happened. I thought this was pretty interesting, actually, that this whole process of me starting a drawing, having things look fine for a while, suddenly realizing that it looks hideous, and somehow getting past that stage where things looked bad began to happen more and more frequently. Well, sometimes without that last part where I fixed the issue, but regardless, this really started to make me ponder about the art process, and is what led me to want to make a video about it. I want to try to figure out what's happening between steps 3 and 4, and how we can replicate that in our process. Or in other words, how do you get through this ugly stage of a drawing where nothing seems to look right? I'll talk about the painting you're watching me work on right now, and how I went through this stage, and I'll also explain how to approach this step in the process so that you don't feel so discouraged when it happens. Okay, so to start off, let me just talk about what was going through my mind while I was working on this painting here. I hated this painting when I was starting off, and I wanted to give up on it so many times. I didn't really think I was going to finish it at a certain point because it started to look really bad, and I didn't think there was anything I could do to save it. But for some reason, I decided to keep messing with this painting anyway, and before I knew it, it had finally come to a point where it didn't look so bad anymore, and the thing I was struggling with for so long, particularly the face, sort of started to come together in such a way that I could see myself actually continuing this painting and finishing it. Now, that's not to say that what I ended up with was exactly how I imagined this would turn out, but it sure is a lot better than where it was when I was thinking about giving up on it. So I'm happy about that, and I'd consider that a successful painting. So the next question is, how exactly can we replicate this when we run into that stage in a painting or a drawing? Since there are different reasons that we may encounter this ugly stage when we create art, and some of them are more easily corrected than others, I want to offer a few different solutions to this issue, and not all of them necessarily result in finishing the artwork. The first piece of advice I would give for this is to take breaks. Stop what you're doing for a while, maybe for an hour or the rest of the day, and revisit it later. I say this because if you've been working on your art for a while, it's possible that your mind and your body need a break from drawing for long periods of time. And you may be trying to solve a problem while you're not in the best state to be solving this problem. In other words, you might just not have as much energy as when you started, and you may not even notice that this is the case, which would make fixing such an issue even more difficult. Taking a step back from your art to do something else, or resting and coming back with a fresh perspective, helps greatly. And I can't count how many times simply taking a break and revisiting the work later has been the solution to feeling stuck at this stage of the painting. However, if you've taken breaks and have come back to your art several times and you still can't seem to get it to look how you want, then my next suggestion is twofold. You could either start over, or you could reevaluate your goals for this artwork and accept that it might be trying to go in another direction than what you originally intended. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you're just not going to get some paintings to look better. And in these cases, probably the best thing to do is to start over. Starting over when you get stuck at this stage in your painting can open up the opportunity for you to take some preventive measures at the beginning. And I'll go into more detail about what those might be later in this video. And by the way, I talk about the concept of starting over in more depth in an older video that I'll put right here on screen and in the description if you're interested. I definitely recommend listening to it because I believe it would really help if you're not sure what else to do to save your drawing or painting. However, I wouldn't default to starting over every time the painting goes south, and instead save that option as sort of a last resort. Now, if you do decide to keep whatever you have, instead of trying to force it to look a certain way, as that will almost always work against you, I would see what new potential the artwork has in its current state. And this is why I mentioned earlier that the painting that you see me working on right now did not turn out the way I initially thought it would. I actually attempted to start over, as you might notice, but I eventually went back to what I was going to scrap and decided that I wanted to see how I could work with what I had and maybe lower my expectations instead of giving up entirely. One last piece of advice for when you're feeling stuck at this stage is to maybe focus on different areas of the painting. Sometimes we tend to overwork the parts of an artwork that we feel are causing the work to look bad, and because of this, I think it's important to not only focus your attention on this area, constantly trying to fix it, and instead work on other parts of the painting to bring them closer to completion. I find that, for example, if I'm stuck trying to fix the character's face, spending my time to work on different areas of the painting that I might find a bit easier will bring the painting closer to being completed sooner than spending all of my time only focusing on this one area that is giving me trouble. So maybe instead I'll work on, say, the background or the clothing, and then come back to the face later. I've also noticed that it's often easier to fix the areas you were having trouble with after you've gotten the rest of the painting to look a little more complete, because having more of the painting finished tends to spark some new ideas on how you can tackle the problem area. And you might not have gotten these ideas if you didn't give the rest of your painting attention as well. And also, as a side note, if you're doing digital art, make sure you zoom out often so you aren't hyper-focusing on one area for too long. And that way you can see how the small changes you make affect the piece as a whole. Oh, and don't forget to flip your canvas every now and then as well, so you can see the painting from a new perspective. The last few things I want to talk about in this video are some preventive measures you can take to reduce the number of times that you get stuck at this messy, unfinished phase of an artwork. There is one thing that I want to clarify though. Most of this video I spent talking about how to overcome this phase of the process when it shows up, rather than how to avoid it completely. And that's because I don't think the ugly stage is completely avoidable, and in fact, a lot of times it's just another step in the process. But it seems that this is often the stage we tend to get stuck at and feel discouraged about. So rather than trying to skip it completely, I think what would be most beneficial when it comes to this is changing your mindset about this stage and how you approach it going forward. Now, there are some more practical things you can do that I want to touch on first before I go into more detail about ways to change your mindset. If you often find that your sketches look good, but once you try coloring them or turning them into paintings, things suddenly get more difficult and don't look as good, then it might come down to your planning and what you do in the earliest stages of the piece. Now, there could be some other factors that go into why this happens, but one solution to this problem is to be looser with your sketch. If your sketch is rigid or has too much detail, then the middle stage of the painting will be harder. It's likely that in failing to plan or having too much going on in the early stages of the work, you've already made the middle stage harder than it needs to be without even noticing. I'd say that it's important to remember that in the earliest stage of a painting or drawing, you need to show restraint and plan out what's most essential to have down first, and differentiate between what details or additions you should include now and which ones you should save for later in the process. So I would say that this is one way to sort of prevent an ugly stage that could have otherwise been avoided. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times you can't prevent or avoid it, so the next best thing to do is to reevaluate what your artwork beginning to look bad actually means and how you think about this when it happens. I think it's important to recognize the moments in the process where you're like 99% sure this painting will turn out badly, and learn to dismiss those thoughts. Because believe it or not, those feelings actually have little to nothing to do with how the painting will really turn out. Feeling like your painting is going to fail is an unreliable feeling. You really just can't go off of that. Because in some cases you'll have paintings where things seem to be going great in the beginning, but you suddenly get stuck and you want to drop them. And you'll have others where the painting starts off looking really bad in the beginning, but for some strange reason you pull through and it turns into one of your best works. You really never know exactly how it's going to turn out. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't even think I could finish this painting. It's crazy how what you think about how a painting will turn out seems to have almost no bearing on the final result, as long as you keep focusing on the process. And that's really what's crucial when it comes to this. And speaking of focusing on the process, the last and maybe most important thing you can do when it comes to how to approach this step in your artwork is to simply trust the process. Trust that a lot of times the ugly stage is just a necessary step in reaching a finished artwork, and try not to doubt your abilities or feel bad when it shows up. Have confidence that you'll be able to get past it, and if you aren't able to get past it, use this as an opportunity to analyze the steps you took that led to the painting looking a way you weren't satisfied with, and learn from some mistakes you might have made. Maybe undo or go to an earlier version of the piece and start from there again if you're able to. I know that helps me a lot when I'm feeling like I've lost sight of what I was originally intending. And while I'm on this point, try saving little snapshots of your work at different stages of the process. So in case it starts to go in a direction you aren't happy with, you can always go back to an earlier version of the work or look back at it for reference. It's sort of like a checkpoint. You might be able to subtly notice me doing this when watching my layers in these speed paints, but I always copy the sketch, the background, and the entire painting at different stages while I work, and save them on different layers that I hide. This little preventive action has saved me from giving up on so many paintings, so I definitely encourage you to start doing that if you don't already. So I think that's about it. Let me know in the comments if anything I covered stood out to you, or if you have any other thoughts or advice on this subject that I didn't mention. And if anyone has any ideas on topics they'd like to hear me discuss, or maybe other types of content you'd like, please share. I'd really appreciate it. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a like, because that'll help the video reach other people who might also find it helpful. That's not a suggestion, by the way. This is me telling you to like the video. Thank you. Oh, and why aren't you in the Discord server yet? Come join us. It's mandatory. We do art things there. I plan on holding drawing sessions in a voice channel where everyone can join and make art and chat. So hopefully we have enough people interested so I can make that a regular thing. So check out the link in the description if you'd like to join our little art community. Okay, enough advertising. Thank you for watching or listening, and I'll see you in the next one.